Hello there, and welcome to Prager U, the series where I take a look at, dissect and debunk the right-wing paid shill bullshittery of the YouTube channel which masquerades as a university, Prager U. And I say, hey Prager, F you. God, I'm still so fucking clever. And today we're going to be taking a look at the British Empire and Prager U's fawning love for this monstrous historical institution. So as it's dealing with the Empire, content warning for some pretty graphic images of death and starvation. Yeah, this one gets pretty intense in places. Also, because this is the internet and the human species has some really dumb pricks in its ranks, a little disclaimer here. In my following critique of the British Empire, I am not saying that nothing of worth was achieved, or that the world would have been a perfect utopia without it, or that the countries it ruled over would be in extra super duper awesome condition without the Empire's existence. So if you want to spam away in the comments section about the Indian railway system, be my guest. But I will be ignoring you because you're a fucking idiot. Anyways, let's take a look at some uber-imperialist propaganda, shall we, as we take a look at a video called, and I shit you not, If You Live in Freedom, Thank the British Empire. Yes, because if you live in freedom, it's definitely because of the Empire which created the concentration camp. Yeah, that's totally what the reason must have been. Oh my god, Prager really are fucking garbage. Jesus.
Over the last 400 years, what power has done the most to spread the ideals of limited government, an independent judiciary, certain inalienable rights, and free markets?
The Galactic Empire. What? No? Oh, sorry, my bad.
That power would be the British Empire.
Oh, for fuck's sake, now my silly joke doesn't seem anywhere near as silly. Firstly, you've got your timings wrong. Britain, as a political entity, didn't exist until the 1707 Act of Union, so there's no way you can stretch the British Empire back that far. Now that might sound like pedantry, but these pricks claim to be a university, for fuck's sake. The least we can ask for is a little bit of precision in terms of dates and titles. But please, bullshitter in a suit, go on, tell us all about how the dark side, I mean the British Empire, was totes about freedom and stuff.
It was Britain that gave these ideals to the United States.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Right, if we did in fact give those things to the United States, what was with that whole Revolutionary War then? Just for yucks, I guess. And in terms of making those global aspirations, there were various thinkers in various parts of the world who came up with very similar ideas to the ones you outlined. Britain doesn't get to claim those as being exclusively totally invented here, and certainly can't dare claim they extolled those virtues during their empire-building rampages across the globe, which, I think it's important to remind you again, they invented the fucking concentration camp during. They were very much concentration camp hipsters. They were doing it before it was cool, or more precisely before it was technically illegal under international law. But I digress.
It was the British Empire, along with America, that defended these ideals in two colossal world wars.
Oh my god, we are only 35 fucking seconds into your video, and I've already had to interrupt 3 times. Well, technically 4 if you include the stupid Star Wars joke. But anyways, your video opens with such a slew of bullshit that I might never actually get through this one. Jesus. Right, firstly, World War I cannot possibly be considered a war for freedom, under any reasonable description of that word. That war was between ruling factions of uber-rich bastards, played out with the blood of the poor. That war was brutal slaughter with no real aim or goal. It was a human tragedy on a massive scale, and you're utter fucking trash for suggesting it had anything to do with freedom. And also, whilst World War II definitely had a large component of freedom as its driving force, it was never quite as simple as that, which I'm quite sure you were aware of, but that shill money doesn't come in by you telling the truth now, does it?
Freedom was an Englishman's right, and wherever he went, he took that right with him, whether he was an English colonist in America,
which was built on slavery, which some cynical viewers might suggest destroys your whole freedom-loving narrative there. I mean, those people literally owned millions of other human beings as property, for fuck's sake. Listen to yourself. Holding these fuckers up as bastions of freedom? What the fuck are you talking about, you clown?
or an English adventurer like Sir Stamford Raffles, creating the free market city-state of Singapore.
Oh yes, the venerable Sir Stamford Raffles, another fine example of exporting freedom within the British Empire, except for all that murderous, brutal suppression of the local population in Java. Yeah, apart from that, he was a good lad, our Stamford.
Or an English officer like T.E. Lawrence, leading Arab tribesmen against the Turks.
Ah yes, Thomas Edward Lawrence, a willing stooge of the British establishment, who lied to the Arab tribesmen who trusted him, telling them that they would get their freedom if they would just do Britain's bidding during the First World War, even though he knew he could not possibly guarantee that the British would actually honour that arrangement. And when inevitably the British stabbed those Arab tribes in the back, reneging on all of their promises that Lawrence had made to them, Lawrence continued to work for the British Foreign Office for years. Oh, that guy, yeah, he was real fucking virtuous. Jesus Christ.
The British always thought of themselves as liberators, as bringers of freedom.
Oh yeah, mental gymnastics can be really fun.
The British believed the final and necessary justification of their empire was a moral one. The British kept the peace.
Kept the peace? Are you fucking kidding me? Firstly, it was an empire, as in ruling by force over people and land it has no fucking right to. It had zero legitimacy, so that was very much in of itself an act of violence against the subjugated peoples, so not peace at all. But I get that he doesn't really mean it in that sense, and he's willing to overlook the fact that the locals had no freedom to, tell the British to fuck off. So let's move on to the more overt violence and war engaged in by the British Empire. The following is a list, but by no means an exhaustive list, of the brutal wars meted out by the British during the Empire days. Ah, I love the smell of peace in the morning.
The British kept the peace. They brought sound, honest administration.
Sound administration? Well, from the perspective of the Empire's own aims, sure, it was sound. Not from the perspective of the people of those lands, though, or of basic justice and decency, but whatevs. And honest administration? Nah, mate, you can suck a dick. The following is a list, but by no means an exhaustive list, of treaties and pacts which Britain signed and it later broke when it fucking suited them. Ah, I love the smell of integrity in the morning.
The British kept the peace. They brought sound, honest administration. And they insisted that basic moral standards were honored.
Basic moral standards? Are you just fucking trolling now? The following is a list, albeit not an exhaustive one, of massacres engaged in by the British Empire. Ah, I love the smell of basic fucking moral fucking standards in the fucking morning!
They were more than content to leave people alone, to let them be themselves, to govern them with the lightest possible hand.
Okay, you're just trying to tempt me to rerun that list of massacres again, aren't you? You're such a fucking liar, dude. It's ridiculous.
In American history, we remember this when we think of the British Empire's so-called benign neglect.
So was the Boston Tea Party just an actual tea party then or something? Yeah, give me benign neglect or give me death. Crazy days.
Even Gandhi praised the British Empire, paraphrasing Jefferson, saying that he believed that the best government was the government that governed least, and that he found that the British Empire guaranteed his freedom and governed him least of all.
Mahatma Gandhi was a freedom activist against the British Empire, and the quote you just gave was almost certainly fabricated, you hack bastard. Also, how free do you think the families of the roughly 20 million Indians that died of starvation under British rule felt? Yeah, I'm not sure that liberating people from being alive could really be considered protecting their freedoms, to be honest.
In the defense of freedom, the empire drew moral lines. No power did more to abolish slavery and the slave trade in the modern world than did the British Empire.
But after having profited from slavery for centuries, the fact that the British eventually got round to not owning other human beings as property anymore is not something I'm going to be giving them a pat on the back for, to be honest. Also, the abolition of slavery was not acquiesced to by the British establishment for the purpose of drawing moral lines. It was to economically cripple the French. It was power politics, not morality, you dipshit.
The British enforced a Pax Britannica, putting down pirates, taming headhunters, and keeping the peace between previously warring tribes and religions.
Except that whole divide and rule thing they did in India and various other places, which sought to actually destroy harmony between different religious and tribal groups in order to keep them all weaker and thus easier to dominate. Yet apart from that, which totally obliterates your argument, good point, Jamp.
While respecting and often ruling through local leaders, the British still insisted on certain Judeo-Christian moral standards.
Oh yes, the Empire definitely stuck by many biblical laws, like, slavery, rape, murder, religious intolerance, homophobia, misogyny, genocide, and many, many more. Thanks, Judeo-Christian values, you've been a super awesome influence on the world.
They had a firm sense of right and wrong. When Sir Charles Napier was confronted by the practice of suttee, widow burning, in India, he told the Brahmin priests involved that he understood it was their custom. But the British had a custom too. They hanged men who burned women alive and their goods were confiscated. So if the Brahmins insisted on continuing their tradition of widow burning, then he would insist on following his British tradition of hanging the murderers of widows.
Ah yes, Charles Napier, another fine example of British civility. Except that although he claimed to oppose slavery, he used slave labour relentlessly. And whilst we're on the topic of hanging people, I think you might find this quote from old Chuck Napier rather interesting. After his barbaric suppression of a revolt in Sindh province, to a Talpur leader who was reluctant to utterly submit to the British capture, Napier said, quote, "Come here instantly, come here at once and make your submission, or I will in a week tear you from the midst of your village and hang you," unquote. Yeah, you can really sense the love of freedom and civility oozing from Napier, can't you?
But we don't have to dig far into history, into the abolition of slavery and widow burning, to find the British Empire on the side of moral right and freedom. We can think of events within our own lifetimes or those of our parents and grandparents. When we think of the two deadliest threats to freedom in the 20th century...
America and the Galactic Empire. Oh, sorry, I already did that joke, didn't I? Never mind, carry on.
We generally think of communism and Nazism. But how many remember that in 1940, after the Hitler-Stalin Pact...
Can't you just call it the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, seeing how that's what it was actually fucking called? I mean, you could even say the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Hitler and Stalin, if you want, but why are you going to speak down to your audience? It's fucking patronising bullshit. Now, some of you again might be thinking that this is pedantry on my part, but if these pricks want to call themselves a university and claim to be putting out educational material, I'm going to hold them to at least a reasonable standard. A standard that they very often fall far, far, far short of.
And after the fall of France, one power, the British Empire, stood alone in mortal combat against the combined tyrannies of the world.
Well, it wasn't quite as simple as that. Firstly, the Soviet Union was of no real direct threat to Britain at the time. In theory, they were in alliance with Nazi Germany, but theory and reality are not always in perfect harmony, as one should already know as a grown adult. Secondly, Britain relied pretty heavily on outside help. The supplies that were shipped to Britain from America on the North Atlantic convoys were essential to the survival of the nation. Also, around 15% of the pilots available to Allied forces at the start of the Battle of Britain were from countries outside the British Empire, mainly Poles, but there were also Belgians, French and others, without whom Britain would almost certainly have lost, and the invasion of the country by Nazi forces would have been all but inevitable. So to say that the British Empire stood alone is really silly and disrespectful. And by the way, I in no way wish to denigrate the efforts of the British people during those times. They should be remembered as some of the greatest freedom fighters that humanity ever knew. I'm merely pointing out that others aided greatly in that fight as well, and to forget those people for cheap political narrative spinning is kind of fucked up.
Even where the British have merited criticism, as in Ireland, there is more to the imperial story. During negotiations to create the Irish Republic, for instance, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, who could speak Welsh, reminded the Irish nationalist and Gaelic extremist Eamon de Valera that the Celts never had a word for republic. It was an idea given to them by the English.
Oh, so he was a patronising twat then. Brilliant. Firstly, I find it rather rich of the English, although Lloyd George was technically Welsh, but you get the idea. I find it rich of the English, a nation with a monarchy, to chastise the Republican leader of Ireland. That's some hypocritical garbage from Lloyd George there. Also, did this greasy motherfucker just describe Eamon de Valera as a Gaelic extremist? Wow, that is some fucking spicy bullshit right there, my friend. De Valera was, for all his faults, a freedom fighter, committed to ousting the corrupt and brutal British rule from Ireland, and is remembered as a liberation hero in Ireland to this day, for fuck's sake. Get the fuck out of here with that revisionist bullshit, Prager.
This is our own history too. If you love America, you should also love the power that gave us our sense of inalienable rights. Rights traceable back to Magna Carta.
Remember earlier in the video when I said you were a little off with your dates? Well, now you're well off. Ridiculously fucking off. The Magna Carta was signed in 1215, just a little bit, about 500 years, before the existence of the British Empire. So why is it being used here to defend the British Empire at all? Also, the Magna Carta was only really set up for the benefit of rich evil bastards centuries ago. So much like America, really. And on that bombshell, I shall end my dissection of Prager's nonsense. Right, this video, even by the standards of Prager University, which are phenomenally low, this video was a load of old shite. Wall-to-wall lies and deceit. They should be truly fucking ashamed of having defended the British Empire. Their bootlickery is rather ironically of historical proportions. They're only really doing it because they want to prop up the idea of imperialism today, because they are imperialist garbage. So Prager, F you. It's still so fucking clever. And I will leave you with the words of Shashi Thakur about the British Empire, albeit that the final sentence is lifted from elsewhere, but it's a good summing up nonetheless. Take it away.
Staying with India, between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" So all notions that the British were trying to do their colonial enterprise out of enlightened despotism, to try and bring the benefits of colonialism and civilization to the benighted heathen. I'm sorry, Churchill's conduct in 43 simply one example of many that gave a lie to this myth. As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience. And no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark.